Are you the girl they sent from the village?
Yes, ma.
The rain had been falling for hours. Cold droplets slid slowly down 16-year-old Amara Okeke's face as she stood outside a tall black iron gate in one of the richest neighborhoods in Lagos. Her small nylon bag hung loosely from her shoulder. Inside it were only a few belongings, 2 faded dresses, a pair of worn slippers, and an old-school notebook she had refused to leave behind. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the enormous mansion behind the gate. The house looked like something from a dream. Bright golden lights glowed through the tall windows. The marble walls shimmered under the rain. Amara tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. Just 1 month ago, she had been a normal girl in her village in Anambra State. She used to wake up early for school, racing her friends down the dusty road while laughing about their teachers. She loved science more than any other subject. Her dream was simple but powerful. She wanted to become a doctor. But dreams were fragile things when poverty came knocking. Her father had died suddenly after falling ill during the farming season. Without him, the small family farm struggled to survive. Her mother's health grew weaker, and school fees became impossible to pay. That was when her uncle stepped in with what he called a solution. A rich family in Lagos needs a housemaid, he had said. You will live in their big house. They will feed you well. Maybe one day they will even help you. At the time, Amara had not known what to say. Now, standing outside the towering gate, she felt the full weight of that decision pressing down on her chest. The iron gate creaked open slowly. A tall woman stepped out, holding an umbrella. Her heels clicked sharply against the wet pavement. She looked elegant and powerful, wrapped in a silk robe that probably cost more than everything Amara owned. Her eyes moved slowly from Amara's wet hair down to her muddy slippers. So you are the girl they brought from the village, the woman said coolly. Amara quickly lowered her eyes. Yes, ma. I am Mrs. Adewale, the woman continued. And in this house we do not tolerate laziness or nonsense. Do you understand? Yes, ma. Mrs. Adewale turned without another word. Follow me. Amara stepped through the gate. As it slammed shut behind her with a heavy metallic clang, she felt something strange deep inside her chest. It felt as if a door had just closed on her old life. Inside the compound, everything looked perfect. The driveway was smooth and shining. Expensive cars sat quietly under a large shelter. The garden was decorated with bright flowers and small glowing lights. Amara had never seen anything like it. But the beauty of the house did not comfort her. Instead, it made her feel small. Very small. Inside the mansion, the floors were made of white marble that reflected the chandelier lights like mirrors. Mrs. Adewale led her down a long hallway toward a small door beside the kitchen. This is where you will sleep, she said, opening it. Amara peeked inside. The room was barely big enough for a thin mattress and a small plastic bucket. There was no window. No fan. But she simply nodded. Thank you, ma. Mrs. Adewale studied her face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether the girl in front of her would cause problems. Finally she said, work starts at 4:30 in the morning. Then she walked away. That night Amara lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. Rain continued to tap gently on the roof. Tears quietly slipped down the sides of her face. But she wiped them away quickly. She had promised herself something during the long bus ride to Lagos. No matter what happened, she would not give up on her dream. Amara's first morning in the Adewale household began before the sun rose. A loud knock shook her small door. Wake up. Mrs. Adewale's voice shouted. There's work to do. Amara jumped up immediately. Within minutes she was outside sweeping the massive compound. The broom felt heavy in her tired hands, but she moved quickly. The tasks kept coming. Sweep the compound. Wash the dishes from the previous night. Clean the living room. Polish the glass tables. Scrub the bathrooms. By the time the sun began rising, sweat had already soaked through her clothes. Then the children came downstairs. Amara, one shouted. "Where is my school tie?" Another complained. "Amara, hurry up." Amara rushed back and forth helping them gather their things. Soon the school bus arrived outside the gate. The children ran out laughing and pushing each other. Amara stood by the gate holding one of their forgotten lunch boxes. As the yellow bus drove away, she watched silently. A sharp ache spread through her chest. Because that bus represented something she had lost. Education. Opportunity. A future. She turned away slowly and returned to her chores. The days became weeks. The weeks became months. Mrs. Adewale was not a cruel woman by nature, but she was strict and impatient. Mistakes were not tolerated. If a plate was placed in the wrong cabinet, she scolded Amara harshly. If the floor was not shining enough, she complained loudly. Sometimes Amara went to bed so exhausted she could barely lift her arms. Yet every night, when the house finally fell silent, she did something no one expected. She studied. From the bottom of her bag, she pulled out the old notebook she had carried from the village. She sat quietly in the kitchen under the dim yellow light. Carefully, she rewrote science notes she still remembered. She solved mathematics problems from memory. Sometimes she found old textbooks the children had thrown away. Those books became her secret treasures. One night, after finishing a page of calculations, she whispered softly to herself, "One day, I will go back to school." Even if the whole world thought it was impossible. Everything changed on a quiet Tuesday night. The Adewale family had a visitor. Mrs. Adewale's younger brother had just returned to Nigeria after many years abroad. His name was Daniel Adewale. Daniel was different from his sister. Where she was sharp and impatient, he was calm and observant. Late that night he walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. And then he stopped. At the kitchen table sat the housemaid. Amara was deeply focused on a page of equations in her notebook. Her lips moved silently as she solved the problem. Daniel stepped closer. He looked at the paper. The answer was correct. "You're studying?" he asked quietly. Amara nearly jumped out of her seat. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I wasn't touching anything." Daniel smiled slightly. "Relax. I'm not angry." He pointed to the notebook. "What class are you in?" Amara hesitated. Then she lowered her eyes. "I stopped school." Daniel studied the pages again. "You're very intelligent," he said. For a moment Amara could not speak. No one in this house had ever said something like that to her. And she had no idea that this quiet moment in the kitchen would soon change the entire direction of her life. Daniel remained standing in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching the nervous girl clutching her one notebook like it was something precious. Amara kept her eyes on the floor, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. She was certain she had done something wrong. In the months she had worked in the Adewale house, she had learned one important rule: servants were not expected to think about school. They were expected to work. Daniel finally pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "What were you studying?" he asked gently. Amara hesitated before slowly pushing the notebook toward him. "Mathematics, sir." Daniel flipped through the pages. Every sheet was filled with neat handwriting, calculations, diagrams, and small notes scribbled in the margins. Some pages were copied from old textbooks. Others looked like problems she had created herself just to practice. "You did all of this?" he asked. Amara nodded quietly. "I remember some things from school." Daniel leaned back in his chair, impressed. How long have you been out of school? Almost a year. And you still remember all this? Amara shrugged slightly. I try not to forget. Daniel smiled. Then he asked a question she had not expected. What did you want to become? Amara's eyes lifted slightly. For a moment, the tired housemaid disappeared and the hopeful village girl returned. A doctor, she whispered. Daniel studied her face carefully. You still can. Amara blinked in surprise. She had heard many things since arriving in Lagos. But no one had ever suggested that her dream was still possible. Daniel stood up and handed her the notebook. Go and sleep, he said kindly. You have a long day tomorrow. Amara nodded quickly. Thank you, sir. But long after she returned to her tiny room beside the kitchen, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Because for the first time since arriving in Lagos, someone had spoken to her like she was more than just a servant. The next morning began like every other. Amara woke up before sunrise and immediately started her chores. Sweep the compound. Wash the dishes. Clean the living room. By mid-morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen. Mrs. Adewale was sitting at the table drinking tea. Good morning, he said. Morning, she replied. Daniel poured himself some coffee and sat down. Then he said something that immediately changed the mood in the room. That house girl should be in school. Mrs. Adewale raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Her name is Amara, Daniel continued calmly. She's very intelligent. Mrs. Adewale scoffed. She's a maid. She's also a child. Mrs. Adewale placed her teacup down sharply. She was brought here to work. Daniel folded his arms. Children should not lose their future because they are poor. His sister sighed impatiently. You just arrived yesterday and you're already interfering in my household. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I'm not interfering. I'm suggesting something reasonable. Mrs. Adewale stared at him for a moment. Finally she said, fine. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. Fine. Yes, she continued. If she finishes all her chores, she can attend evening classes. Daniel smiled slightly. That's fair. Neither of them noticed that Amara had been standing quietly in the hallway, holding a tray. She had heard every word. Tears filled her eyes. That evening when Mrs. Adewale told her the decision, Amara almost collapsed from shock. You may attend evening lessons, Mrs. Adewale said stiffly. But your work must not suffer. Amara nodded rapidly. Yes, Ma. Thank you, Ma. That night she clutched her notebook tightly against her chest. It felt like someone had just opened a door she thought had been permanently locked. But just when hope began to grow in her heart, trouble arrived. 3 days later the house erupted in chaos. Mrs. Adewale's voice thundered through the hallway. My bracelet. The children gathered in the living room. What happened? One asked. My diamond bracelet is missing. The entire house became tense. Mrs. Adewale searched her bedroom drawers furiously. It was here this morning. Her eyes suddenly moved toward the hallway where Amara stood. The room went silent. Amara's stomach dropped. Mrs. Adewale slowly walked toward her. You cleaned my room today? Yes, Ma. Did you touch my jewelry? No, Ma. Mrs. Adewale's voice hardened. Then where is my bracelet? Amara shook her head quickly. I don't know, Ma. The woman's eyes narrowed. Are you sure? Amara felt her throat tightening. I swear I didn't take it. But suspicion had already taken hold. Mrs. Adewale turned to the security guard. Search her room. Amara's heart pounded as they entered the tiny space beside the kitchen. They searched under the mattress. Inside her bag. Inside the plastic bucket. Nothing. Yet the tension in the house remained heavy. Mrs. Adewale folded her arms. If that bracelet doesn't appear, you're leaving this house. Amara's legs trembled. She knew what that meant. If she lost this job, she would have nowhere to go. Her mother was still sick. Her uncle would never welcome her back. Her dream of returning to school would disappear forever. The rest of the day passed like a nightmare. No one spoke to her. The children whispered when she passed by. Even the security guard watched her suspiciously. Only Daniel remained calm. That evening he called Amara into the living room. She stood nervously near the door. "Sit down," he said gently. She shook her head quickly. "I'm fine, sir." Daniel studied her face. "Did you take the bracelet?" Amara looked him straight in the eyes. "No, sir." Daniel nodded slowly. "I believe you." Those 3 words nearly made her cry. Because in a house full of suspicion, someone finally trusted her. And that trust would soon reveal a truth that no one expected. The house grew quiet as night settled over the Adewale mansion. But Amara could not sleep. She sat on the thin mattress in her tiny room, her hands trembling in her lap. Every few seconds she wiped tears from her cheeks, but they kept returning. Her mind raced with fear. If she was sent away, where would she go? Back to the village where her sick mother depended on the little money she sent. Back to the uncle who had already warned her never to return empty-handed. And worst of all, what would happen to her dream of returning to school? It felt like everything she had been silently fighting for was about to collapse. Outside her room, the large house was still. But in another part of the building, something important was about to happen. Daniel sat in the living room staring at the blank television screen. Something about the situation bothered him. Amara's reaction earlier had not looked like guilt. He had spent years working with people and had learned to recognize fear, anger, and deception. What he saw in the girl's eyes that afternoon was not the panic of a thief. It was the panic of someone being wrongly accused. He leaned back on the couch and thought carefully. Then a small detail returned to his mind. Earlier that afternoon, when the house had been busy, he had passed through the hallway and briefly seen Busy, the other maid, leaving Mrs. Adewale's bedroom. At the time, he had not thought much about it. But now it seemed strange. Daniel stood up. Quietly, he walked toward the small security office near the gate where the house surveillance monitors were kept. The security guard looked surprised when he entered. "Good evening, sir." Daniel nodded. "I want to review the camera footage from this afternoon." Within minutes, the monitors flickered to life. They began scrolling through the recordings. Hallway. Kitchen. Living room. Then the camera outside Mrs. Adewale's bedroom appeared. Daniel leaned forward slightly. On the screen, the hallway looked quiet. Then the door opened. Busy stepped out. She looked around nervously before walking quickly down the hall. But something caught Daniel's attention. Her hand slipped briefly into the pocket of her apron. He rewound the video. This time he watched more closely. Before leaving the room, Busy had placed something small into her apron pocket. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Call Mrs. Adewale," he told the guard. 10 minutes later everyone was gathered in the living room. Mrs. Adewale sat stiffly in her chair. Amara stood quietly near the doorway, confused and frightened. Busy stood near the wall with her arms crossed. Daniel gestured toward the television. "Watch carefully." The footage began to play. At first nothing seemed unusual. Then the moment appeared. Busy exiting the bedroom. Her nervous glance down the hallway. Her hand slipping into the apron pocket. The room fell silent. Mrs. Adewale slowly turned toward Busy. "What is this?" Busy's face drained of color. I was just cleaning. Daniel spoke calmly. Then did you plan to place the bracelet in Amara's room? The words seemed to echo through the room. Amara gasped softly. Busy's composure finally broke. Tears filled her eyes. She was taking everything from me. Busy cried suddenly. Mrs. Adewale frowned. What are you talking about? Before she came here, I was the only one working in this house. Everyone trusted me. Her finger pointed toward Amara. But then she arrived, then suddenly everyone was praising her. Even you, she snapped at Daniel. She studies, she works hard, she acts innocent. Her voice trembled with bitterness. I just wanted her gone. The room fell silent again. Mrs. Adewale's expression hardened. You tried to destroy an innocent girl's life because you were jealous. Busy lowered her head. Daniel's voice remained calm but firm. You will leave this house tonight. Busy looked up in shock. But pack your things, Mrs. Adewale said coldly. Busy realized there would be no second chance. Within an hour, she was gone. After the gate closed behind Busy, the living room remained quiet. Amara stood near the doorway, still struggling to understand everything that had just happened. Mrs. Adewale finally stood up. For a moment she simply looked at the young girl. Then she spoke. I owe you an apology. Amara blinked in surprise. I accused you without proof, Mrs. Adewale continued. That was wrong. Amara lowered her head respectfully. It's okay, Ma. But Daniel smiled slightly. No, he said gently. It's not okay. But at least the truth came out. Mrs. Adewale sighed and walked toward the staircase. Before leaving the room, she paused. You may begin your evening classes tomorrow, she said. Then she went upstairs. Amara stood frozen. Her evening classes. Her chance at education. It was still there. Daniel walked toward her. You see, he said kindly. Amara wiped her eyes. Yes, sir. And for the first time since arriving at the Adewale house, she truly believed that her life might change. The months that followed were the hardest Amara had ever worked in her life. Every morning she woke before dawn to complete her chores. Sweep the compound. Clean the house. Cook breakfast. Wash clothes. Then in the evening, after finishing her work, she rushed to the small community school where evening classes were held. Most nights she returned home exhausted. But she still studied late into the night. Daniel often found her in the kitchen working through difficult science problems. And each time, he smiled with quiet pride. Slowly, her grades began to improve. Her teachers noticed her determination. One day her science teacher pulled her aside. You are one of the brightest students in this program, he said. Amara could hardly believe it. Months later, the school announced something extraordinary. A scholarship opportunity for outstanding students. Amara studied harder than ever. Weeks later the results were announced. Her name was at the top of the list. She had earned a scholarship to attend university. When she told Daniel, he laughed with joy. I knew it, he said. Mrs. Adewale even smiled proudly. You have made this house proud, she admitted. Years passed. Amara left the Adewale house to begin medical school. University was difficult. There were nights she thought she might fail. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the tiny room beside the kitchen where she once slept. She remembered the day she was accused of stealing something she never touched. And she remembered the one person who had believed her. That memory pushed her forward. Year after year. Exam after exam. Until finally the day arrived. Amara stood proudly in a white coat holding her medical degree. Dr. Amara Okeke. Several years later, a new hospital opened in Lagos. Doctors, journalists, and community leaders gathered for the grand ceremony. Standing near the entrance was a confident young woman greeting the guests. Her name badge read, Dr. Amara Okeke. Suddenly she heard a familiar voice behind her. So, the girl who studied in my kitchen finally became a doctor. Amara turned and laughed. Daniel. He smiled proudly. I told you your dream wasn't over. She nodded. And I believed you. Over time their friendship deepened. Respect became affection. And affection slowly turned into love. The girl who once arrived in Lagos with nothing but a small bag and a worn notebook had built a life far greater than she ever imagined. And she never forgot the lesson her journey had taught her. Sometimes the world will doubt you. Sometimes people will accuse you unfairly. But if you refuse to give up, your story can still end in triumph. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and share. Also follow for more interesting stories.